Halo Infinite and 343 Industries. There are a number of people who will make the argument that Halo Infinite wasn't a financial failure. They'll cite some like random person apparently who might know inside knowledge who might have said at one point that Halo Infinite did turn a profit.
Well, Halo Infinite's profitable now. It's profitable.
Is it really? Where'd you get that from?
People. Sources. It's been profitable for a while. Microtransactions all over the place. It's gonna happen, right? Yeah, it's profitable.
I don't agree. I think Halo Infinite cost Microsoft way more money than whatever could have possibly been made back based on how Halo Infinite has performed since its launch. Are things better now? Well, yeah. And I'm sure that there is some money being made through Halo Infinite, but nowhere near covering the costs of what it took for this game to be developed and to come out. And I think to argue against this claim would be silly because I feel like it's pretty straightforward. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but like, I don't know, a studio that is making a lot of money doesn't lay off a ton of staff members and rebrand the entire studio. Let's look at the simple numbers because a lot of people think that the estimates for Halo Infinite's development were not as large as what some outlets reported. Just in general, people are like, nah, there's no way Halo Infinite cost $500 million, which is what has been reported by different outlets and it's been a rumor circling around. But when you start to look at the numbers themselves, and you know, I'm not the best at math, I'll be straight up about that. I don't think $500 million or at least a couple $100 million is out of the ballpark for how much Halo Infinite cost. So let's look at this in context. In 2024, 343 Industries has currently 280 employees, which is down from the 500 employees it had in the years previously. And back in 2021, they had 750 employees. This fact, the 750 employee thing, is right off of the LinkedIn page of Chris Lee, the former head of 343. Now, for the sake of just a simple estimation, let's just say on average, during the development of Halo Infinite, there were 500 employees. Development on Halo Infinite started after Halo 5 finished up in 2015. So let's say from 2016 to 2021, we had 500 employees only, even though it was way more employees. Now, obviously, there's more than just game developers working on a game, but bear with me. The average game developer salary in Redmond, Washington is, I don't know, approximately $100,000 a year. This could range. I'm sure there are people who make way less than that, though the cost of living in the Washington area is insane. Unfortunately, in Washington state, I'm pretty sure $100,000 a year would make you maybe middle class at best, especially in the Seattle area. And then I'm sure the salary range goes way beyond that for executives higher up in leadership positions, where those people are probably making, you know, well over $200,000 a year. But let's just say, just for numbers' sake, to get a ballpark estimate, $100,000 a year. That is $50 million a year, probably needing to be reserved for payroll. Then Halo Infinite's development took way too long, taking 6 years for a new entry in the Halo series to release, and we've already ballooned up to $300 million. Now sure, there were other things happening with the Halo IP that I'm sure many of those employees worked on. You know, there was Halo Wars 2 came out during that time. Part of the studio might have helped Splash Damage work on MCC because of the PC port. Like, there's moving parts, people found stuff to do, but as far as like main game entry, which is like the big factor that Microsoft wants the future of Halo to be good for, we're looking at $300 million just in salary alone. And that'd be like if everyone worked remote. What was the marketing budget for Halo Infinite? Actually, in 2023, when Microsoft was trying to acquire Activision, this became a relevant topic, and the UK Competition and Markets Authority revealed that some major publishers easily spend over $500 million marketing a AAA game. Halo Infinite did have some decent marketing going on with it, but let's say they didn't do $500 million in marketing. Let's say they just did $100 million in marketing. What about insurance plans for employees? What about the building where employees develop the game? Do you remember how 343 Industries was notoriously known for outsourcing a ton of work to contract employees who maybe got paid substantially less, but also were on the whole like timed revolving door thing that really just wasn't a good way to do things? Do you guys remember how long the credits were in Halo Infinite? And we haven't even talked about the outsourcing of other video game studios, which is a major thing that Halo Infinite had. I mean, there were so many studios that worked on Halo Infinite as like a support studio with, you know, contracts that Microsoft had to pay the bill on in a lot of different instances. And of course, during the time, you know, Halo Wars 2 was also outsourced to another studio. MCC was outsourced to another studio because 343 didn't know how to fix it. I don't know. Not only do I think $500 million is, you know, estimate that is closer than what a lot of people think it was, was, I think Halo Infinite might have cost substantially more than $500 million if we're talking about cash flow alone. At the end of the day, Microsoft is a company. So I'm not arguing that Microsoft was like, just randomly blindfolded, not realizing the risk of making Halo Infinite and the state of its development. Had Halo Infinite launched in a normal time frame as it was expected to, coinciding with the launch of the Xbox Series X, and then say the game ended up being like one of the greatest games ever because of like all of the polish and effort and people that worked on the game, I think Microsoft maybe could have turned a profit on Halo Infinite. But that's not at all what happened. I mean, they missed the launch of the game because of, by a long shot, having a whole year delaying the game behind, which I think probably directly affected the sales of the new Xbox Series X. If they could have had a lot of people hyped up about the game buying the new console, they would have, seen the profit return back to the company as a whole in kind of a different light. It would have, made more sense. We can't really calculate how much money they could have made back in game sales themselves, considering the game launched with multiplayer for free and then the campaign on Game Pass, which probably made up a very large percentage of people who actually played the game. And at the same time, we can see the Steam chart numbers for the free-to-play multiplayer and how quickly that tanked. So it's not like they were making up a whole lot of money on the PC side of things, and they're pretty much reliant on battle passes and stuff, which to this day, I think there's still people very unhappy with the way that armor permutations were handled in the game as a whole. So it's not like it's some super popular thing and there's a bunch of people like regularly checking up on the store and like hyping up things coming into the store like you would see for other games that have rotating shops. I think it makes sense that 343 Industries has been rebranded and that they're a much smaller team than what it had ballooned up to, because Microsoft straight up doesn't want to lose even more money. They see the potential of Halo and the importance of Halo for the Xbox brand, and that's great, but they're not willing to have another Halo Infinite sized bill and loss. So I feel justified in saying Halo Infinite lost too much money, even though some people are going to still argue with me and be like, no, the game totally was profitable. There's no way, in my opinion, as a random person who has no industry experience.
But before we get into the rest, I want to tell you guys that GamerSubs has their Christmas sale going on right now. Every type of GamerSubs purchased in the same cart unlocks a next tier and a free gift. There's 5 tiers and there's some pretty cool gifts that come with it, like the sick looking waifu stocking, for example. Supplies on these gifts are limited, so make sure you check them out as soon as you can. And also use code RocketSlove for 10% off on your order and to support us. Back to the video.
Now, of course, Halo Infinite was a weird case because the game launched pretty strongly when they just dropped multiplayer out of the blue, and at the very least, there was a high player number when the game came out. But within weeks, one of the biggest game type modes was completely not working all of a sudden, and all of the developers were on Christmas break, which meant that the game wouldn't get fixed until well after the new year. Neat. But then imagine another AAA studio colossally failing with their game the same year, the same release window, and then pointing to Halo Infinite as the reason why your game didn't do as well. That's right, baby. We're talking about Battlefield 2042. Man, I don't know what goes on with the Battlefield series. It seems like they kind of have this like hit and miss formula where sometimes, they mess up a few times, then they do something kind of cool like Battlefield 1, then they do some weird stuff like Battlefield 5's Battle Royale mode. It's a roller coaster, and this new Battlefield game, Battlefield 2042, was kind of hyped up a bit because it was like playing an homage to the popular Battlefield 2142 from 2006, but also like, taking it into a different time period, being in like the near future. All right, this is something different. We're getting away from the historical stuff, and it's been a long time since Battlefield 4, where it was more of like a modern era game, and the game just ends up being a stripped down version of a standard Battlefield game, except you're expected to pay the full retail price at launch, or even more if you want like, those little extra bonuses they try to throw your way. It was weird. Going up into the launch of the game, there was good news and bad news always going on with this game. It was a give and take constantly. Like, hey, there's going to be no campaign. It's a multiplayer only experience, but here's a cool nostalgia trailer to get you hyped up for it using Battlefield 4's characters. Also, it'll be the first Battlefield game that's cross-play, as long as you're playing on the Xbox Series and PlayStation 5 or PC, and you're not like, still rocking the Xbox One and PS4, even though the new generation was only barely a year old at this point. If you were playing on the last gen, you got a even more watered down experience. And then the game also kind of didn't play that well, especially at launch. I mean, not only was like the weapon selection and all of the things you would expect for a Battlefield game seeming like a smaller experience than what you would normally get in a main game, but like the movement system felt kind of clunky for some reason.
reason. And that's like a big issue to randomly have. There was a lot of different bugs and glitches, which, all right, it's a Battlefield EA game, so you can expect some level of it, but it was kind of egregious. They did some cool things with the marketing, doing this like little remix type throwback to some of the OG clips people used to hit in Battlefield as like a big marketing push, but then like the game itself isn't that good. This game would end up actually becoming the lowest rated installment in the entire Battlefield series, though Electronic Gaming Monthly actually gave the game a perfect 5 out of 5, so someone take their journalism card away. I don't know. This game just was not working for a lot of people. The whole specialists system was different and just made things feel like you were more restricted than ever before in what you could do. And yeah, there was some praise for things like the special portal mode where you can go back and like play different things from previous Battlefield games, and the visuals and set pieces are kind of interesting, but it seemed like the general consensus was that the game had a lot of promise had this been polished and finished, and there was a lot of good ideas there, but ultimately the game just fell short in every way possible. I mean, there's bugs everywhere, there's netcode issues, there's bugs from previous Battlefield games that were rolling over into this game even. The map design still needed some work. Like, some of these levels are kind of a pain to traverse when you're like on foot. Now, I'll be honest, I've never been really big on the multiplayer side of the Battlefield games. It's just too much going on for me to feel like I'm making an impact. So I understand already, I'm at a predisposition where I'm not going to be like super hyped about a Battlefield game, but I could tell there was a dramatic difference between me jumping on and playing Battlefield Bad Company 2 back in the day with the boys and me jumping on and playing Battlefield 2042 when that came out with the boys. I don't know, I just felt like it was even more chaotic, I guess is the right word, than ever before. Within a few weeks, the game had already lost 70% of its initial players on Steam, and by the end of December, the end of the year, that, you know, it had only been out for like weeks at that point, it had already dropped below Battlefield 5 on Steam's daily player numbers, which just shows how quickly people were jumping ship from the game to play literally anything else. By April, at some points, the player numbers were dipping below 1,000. It's actually impressive how much players fell off the game at a faster rate than even a game like Halo Infinite. So what happens when EA has to do an earnings call and discuss why this big AAA game that cost millions and millions of dollars did not at all meet its sales expectations? Well, they just kind of blame it on anything else, right? They said that the main issue was remote work during the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, I can see that to an extent maybe. They remarked that some of the design choices made by the team did not resonate with the Battlefield community. That's a cute way of putting it. And then, of course, they pulled the whole Halo Infinite. That is why people stopped playing Battlefield 2042, saying that it came out around the same time and apparently created a comparison for multiplayer shooter fans that was not favorable because Halo Infinite was a very polished title, whereas Battlefield 2042 contained bugs and wasn't as polished. So just remember that. EA sees Halo Infinite as the gold standard for what a game fully polished should look like at launch. Great. Honestly, if they would have just made a competent game where they would have, you know, cooked a little bit longer or managed things better, I don't know, whatever it was, they had like this one in the bag, I felt like, if they would have just done, you know, the bare minimum across the board in what you would expect, right? Because they were competing straight up against, sure, Halo Infinite. And what else? What was Call of Duty doing? Call of Duty Vanguard? Oh yeah, people loved Vanguard. So I felt like they could have had a slam dunk here. I'm not going to act like I fully understand the ins and outs of everything in the game development industry, especially as an outsider looking in. But I think everybody can agree that big games like AAA games are taking longer than ever to be created and developed. And you can only help but to wonder if publishers feel like throwing money at the issue is the solution, inflating the numbers of teams and cooks in the kitchen working on a game, rather than fostering like a tight-knit team and paying them very well for their successes so that they want to stay at the studio and continue to work on it in the future. Luke and I talk about this from time to time, but if you look at like Japanese game development, for example, Nintendo is an example of this. Some of the developers there and the leadership there have literally been there since the Nintendo Entertainment System days. A lot of them. We're not talking like a few people. These people will work at that company and continue to work for all of their lives, their professional lives. I feel like Western game development sees people jumping between studios regularly, and I think that the bottom line is that publishers don't reward good development teams nearly enough for their work and feel like they can outsource and contract their way into a massive hit. Oh, and let's not forget about the whole extraction mode hazard zone thing that they tried to introduce to compete with Tarkov, just trying to ride any trend. I mean, they did the whole battle royale the time before, and this time they had this. And it didn't take them long to decide that they were not going to continue to support that mode. Now, to be fair, Battlefield 2042 did do a couple of updates over the course of the game's life, and the game did get a little bit better. There were fixes, improvements to the gameplay and balancing and whatever. And the player base has improved a little bit, especially because the game goes on sale regularly for a very, very low price. Not the price you normally would see a mainline Battlefield game go down to within the first year or so of the game being out. But hey, they were desperate, and microtransactions can sell if they can have a player base that's actually looking at the store occasionally.
And while we were just on the topic of Nintendo doesn't always just have a gold mine. Sometimes they start a franchise and it fails, even through numerous attempts to get this off the ground. And this is what happened with Chibi Robo. Chibi Robo was kind of this like wacky series about a tiny robot that is like in this cute world, and he's like, you know, doing puzzles and all that stuff. And the team behind this was really, really passionate about this franchise. When you heard them in interviews and stuff, they were really thinking that Chibi Robo could be one of Nintendo's biggest IPs. Now, they were an independent studio called Skip Ltd, with Nintendo publishing and funding the development and also owning the rights to the Chibi Robo franchise. I think maybe shared with Bandai Namco. I'm not too sure what the legality on is, but Nintendo owns majority of Chibi Robo. The first Chibi Robo game came out on the GameCube in 2005. It had a mix of platforming and life sim gameplay, and you're running around the house helping a family that is kind of struggling with each other. And, you know, people kind of liked it, thought it had some charm to it, but it would only end up selling 140,000 copies in America and 60,000 copies in Japan, which wasn't nearly enough to recoup the development costs that they had. But, you know, maybe Nintendo saw some other reasons that this franchise failed. You know, the GameCube was kind of not their best console, and this game came out during like the late cycle of the GameCube's life. So Nintendo was probably like, yeah, we lost some money here, but maybe we can still make some more Chibi Robo games in the future and give this franchise another try. Which they would do in 2007 on the Nintendo DS with Chibi Robo Park Patrol, which this time changed the setting a little bit. This time you weren't in a house, you were in like this park most of the time, and, you know, just doing the regular Chibi Robo stuff still. Now, with the release of this game, they actually made a big misjudgment. They would release this game as a Walmart exclusive as part of some, you know, environmental friendly Walmart initiative that they had going on at the time. So they would limit the availability of this game in North America, which last time was their biggest selling market. So partially because of this, the game only managed to sell about 50,000 copies worldwide. But Nintendo still wasn't willing to give up on this franchise that had 2 games right now losing their money, and they would bring it back for the 3DS with Chibi Robo Photo Finder. This game heavily leaned into the gimmicks of the 3DS camera, and, you know, you were doing augmented reality in the game. It was honestly kind of weird, and these gimmick games often feel like glorified tech demos, and I mean, I don't know, this is probably the same case here. And once again, this only sold 30,000 copies globally. Now, 3 games in and falling sales numbers with every single release, they would give this franchise one more attempt at capturing a larger audience with the release of Chibi Robo Ziplash in 2015. Development on the game took about 2 years, which is relatively short for a Nintendo project, but it was still a big investment of time and resources. This time the game was a side-scrolling platformer, a big departure from the series' usual vibe of the 3D platformer. I think Nintendo was trying to make the game more mainstream with that and appeal to a wider audience, or maybe they thought the original gameplay was holding the franchise back or something like that. We'll never know the true intentions, but they definitely shifted the gameplay style with this release. But what I think ended up happening because of this is that they would just isolate the old fans and, you know, didn't really capture any new fans at the same time either. Critics weren't impressed with the game, and sales, you know, ended up being really short at just 80,000 copies worldwide. I mean, more than the previous 2 games, but still nothing to offset the development cost and, you know, the losses from the previous games as well. Now, I think the Chibi Robo franchise had some potential, and it definitely had some creative people working on it. You can tell that a lot of love and detail by hardworking developers went into these games, and, you know, their efforts just weren't rewarded commercially. Now, partly you can be like, you know, just not a lot of people were interested in this tiny robot, but Nintendo also kept making decisions that seemed like they worked against the Chibi Robo franchise, like having a limited release at Walmart or changing the gameplay style. And then when the 4th release, Ziplash, flopped, Nintendo had sunk millions into the series without ever seeing a profit, and they had no choice but to call it quits at this point. The studio would at some point, you know, become defunct. It's not quite clear, but former employees confirmed that the studio is defunct now, and that was kind of the last nail in the coffin for the Chibi Robo franchise. Now, while Nintendo doesn't have any interest in the Chibi Robo franchise anymore, some of the developers that worked at Skip Limited would go on to found their own studio called Tiny Wonder Studios, and they announced the first game in July of this year called Robo, which seems to be a spiritual successor to Chibi Robo and is going back to that initial 3D platforming style that the GameCube game had. So we'll have to end up seeing what happens with this game. And maybe without Nintendo interfering in some of the decisions, it can be a successful 3D platformer.
Now, we all know that when it comes to like first-person shooter games, Call of Duty typically has a pretty good hold on the genre. I mean, they do a main game release every year, and they have multiple studios working on a new game for each year. It's actually crazy how many different studios work on Call of Duty in total, but it's a popular genre, and there's a lot of money to be made. And Ubisoft finally decided to throw their hat in the ring and make something that could directly compete against Call of Duty, xDefiant. This game was actually originally Tom Clancy's xDefiant to make it a part of the Tom Clancy verse, but they dropped that later. And for something that obviously was being set up to try to compete directly against Call of Duty, things were looking decent, at least for some parts of things. You see, xDefiant's studio, Ubisoft San Francisco, managed to bring Mark Rubin on as a lead developer who is known for his work on the original Call of Duty series. I mean, he's literally this guy. Like, he even did the stand-in for the Call of Duty 4 and Modern Warfare 2 box arts. Like, he's the dude that they took the picture of to put on the front of the game. But I mean, he was a developer also. He also was very, very vocal online about his opinion on skill-based matchmaking and has posted on Twitter about it, using it to promote xDefiant and what he was working on, telling people to go do the play tests to see what it's like without skill-based matchmaking. During a time where Call of Duty seems to get the most criticism from the vocal part of the community about its skill-based matchmaking system. So xDefiant officially released in early summer of 2024, you know, in the off-season after the newest Call of Duty game had been out. Not a good Call of Duty game either. People were sick of Activision and how they handled Modern Warfare 3, and the game had an explosive launch. 1 million unique players within the first 2.5 hours. This made it Ubisoft's fastest game to ever reach 1 million players, and within 48 hours, it had reached 3 million players and 300k concurrent players across all platforms. There were server issues causing like wait times and stuff like that, but a lot of those issues ended up being resolved pretty quickly after launch. Also, they're pretty transparent as to what was coming in the future. They did a year one roadmap that would show when the new weapons, new maps, and what would be coming into the future. So what ended up happening here? I know there are die-hard xDefiant fans who will probably fight me tooth and nail on why I think this game failed, and Luke and I actually both thought this game would not continue to be successful after its launch. I mean, the gameplay of xDefiant is fine. It's competent, I guess. It feels mostly like a Call of Duty game with a couple of small differences, but nothing massive to kind of move the needle in any direction. But I think the biggest thing is if you're trying to dethrone Call of Duty, you have to come at Call of Duty with everything. Whether you love or hate Call of Duty, you can't deny that Black Ops 6 ended up being a catalyst in xDefiant's shutdown. Black Ops 6 has a lot going for it, feature-wise alone. Sure, xDefiant is free to play, and Call of Duty has a free-to-play mode that's different, but the fact that Black Ops 6 and Call of Duty as a whole has so many different moving parts keeps players engaged way longer than just being a standard arena game with nothing else going on. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 has a campaign, it has a multiplayer, whether you love it or hate it. It has the face-off mode, which is like a different way of doing multiplayer where it's a little bit smaller. Then it has its whole battle royale thing going for it. And then it has its whole zombies thing now going for it. Between campaign, multiplayer, Warzone, and zombies, there's like 4 massive different things moving on the Call of Duty side. And then you could play xDefiant and just play one of those modes. Even if you want to make the argument that xDefiant's multiplayer feels better than Black Ops 6's multiplayer, I think the games are too similar in gameplay in that regard, but Black Ops 6 just has more to do overall in it, especially now that level ups and unlocks are all tied together where it doesn't really matter if you're playing multiplayer or zombies or Warzone, and the fact that Black Ops 6 was more available because of the whole Game Pass thing, it just meant a lot of people weren't going to play xDefiant. xDefiant was falling off hard leading into Black Ops 6's release and through like the rest of the few weeks before a bunch of layoffs started happening. Then there was rumors circulating around that xDefiant was going to get shut down, and xDefiant's leadership was like, no. Don't you guys worry. We're not shutting down. We're not going to be shutting down after season 4 either. It's all good. And then like a week later, they announced that they were in fact shutting down after season 3 launch. So not only were they not shutting down after season 4, I guess that part was true, but they're not even going to make it to season 4. So,
Yikes.
Now, xDefiant is a little bit more of a shame because I do think that there was a core audience that liked the gameplay, and a lot of people were maybe just trying out Black Ops 6 and would have come back to xDefiant when some new content rolled out. And maybe xDefiant had the potential to grow into something, but with how quickly it lost players, I just think playing xDefiant was just more of the same experience, and people dropped off the game a lot quicker than anyone had expected. Ubisoft, already not being in the best situation financially across the board, decided to pull the plug now, lay people off, move people to other projects, and cut their losses rather than trying to keep a game like xDefiant alive, where the game would just continue to bleed money.
Actually, hearing Elijah talk about Concord reminded me of another massive hero shooter failure released by Amazon Games. That game was called Crucible and was supposed to be their first massive game to reach into a larger audience. This game was developed in Seattle, so the cost must have been crazy, and the salaries are probably through the roof, relatively. Elijah did some of the math earlier about Seattle, so just imagine the cost of it. So this game had a couple beta phases, but nothing really major was changed about the game. So when the game was finally released, people just didn't care for it, and it feels like nobody even played it. And within a short amount of time, they actually did something that I had never seen before, and that is they made this game a closed beta again after releasing it already. So they kind of reverted the switch and were like, hey, this is closed now. But it wouldn't stop there because, they would also shut down the closed beta eventually and shut down the whole game with that. But xDefiant wasn't Ubisoft's only big money loss recently, and we've talked about Skull and Bones quite a bit in previous videos, so I'm gonna keep it short. Originally, it was announced at E3 2017. The game was pitched as a naval combat-focused multiplayer title inspired by Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, which had its own multiplayer. So development for this project started all the way back in 2013, but quickly fell into development hell. Many reports claimed that the direction shifted multiple times from a live service multiplayer experience to a more story-driven adventure, and those changes would just end up increasing the budget every time they were made, because it would cost more time to redevelop the game. They also had some contracts with the Singapore government, and they got some tax incentives over there to open a studio or something, so they were kind of forced to make this game and keep sinking more money into it. But as time goes on, it just seemed like the game was getting delayed, and reports of a growing budget reached as high as Ubisoft spending $650 million to $850 million on this game. Those are crazy numbers. That's almost $1 billion for this absolutely garbage game. This game would have been that one game in like those tables at Walmart, or like those barrels that had a bunch of like DVDs or games in it, and there was always like one game or DVD that had a lot more copies than the other ones because it's so bad nobody wanted to buy it, even in this like cheap bin. And I feel like Skull and Bones would have had a lot of copies laying around in there. It's just really bad, kind of boring, and did not represent 10 years of development or however long it ended up being. And it definitely didn't seem like they were going to recoup their 650 to 850 million losses, which might be a little high, I don't know, but they definitely have to have sunk at least a couple hundred millions into this project for sure.
So for this next part, if you're wondering why my microphone sounds a little bit different, that's because I'm recording on my iPhone from a hotel room, because my original version of this recording, I messed it up somehow. I don't know what I was doing. Nonetheless, we can't make this video without talking about Concord. And I don't know, when you think of Concord, what is the first thing that comes to mind? To Sony, it's probably the reported $400 million budget that was given to this game that was, supposed to be the next biggest thing that would hopefully eventually expand into a Star Wars level franchise with numerous spin-offs. That's not something I'm making up either. This is something straight off of the Wikipedia page. I mean, look at that. See? Star Wars level franchise with numerous spinoffs. Nonetheless, Concord was in development for a very, very long time, and most of us already know the story about what happened to Concord, right? It shut down after a couple of days. Nonetheless, Concord was in development for years, and I don't know, who would have guessed, like if we do a show of hands here of everyone watching, who would have guessed that a game that was trying to lean into the whole hero shooter genre, which had already been around for almost a decade at this point, pretty much, a genre where most games already do the free-to-play model, and Concord was supposed to just come in and be successful with a paywall just to play the game. Yeah, it didn't work out well. Concord's development spanned 6 years. The studio started in 2018, and they hired on a ton of veteran developers. So there was, a big deal kind of associated with this game. It just nobody cared because there was already so many other games in this genre. And at the same time, what was Concord really doing that was different or better than, say, Overwatch? I mean, for a game to come into this genre and be successful, it has to do something unique, something different, or at least something better. And Concord
in all of the same ways you would hope, just wasn't that. So when Concord did finally release, it was, not that good in reviews, at least. I mean, it was lucky to get a 6 out of 10, but some outlets were a little bit harsher than others. And the game failed to exceed a simultaneous count of 700 players on Steam. Though the game did also come on PlayStation 5 and we can't track those numbers, I assume it wasn't that good. In comparison, Helldivers 2, which was also a PlayStation first-party title that made its way into Steam, had 400,000 initial Steam players, and Concord couldn't get 700. I don't know. Something wasn't cooking here. In total, apparently the game sold a total of around 25,000 units, 10,000 of those units being on Steam and 15,000 on PlayStation, and it took literal days before Sony announced that Concord would be taken offline and that refunds would be issued, so it's a total loss. The sad part about this is while the game director ended up stepping down, it didn't stop Sony from just shutting down the studio altogether. They were like, you know what, this was rough. It did shut down pretty quick. It was the second shortest living online game. Nonetheless, there's still one interesting thing with Concord. They were so sure Concord was the next big thing that they partnered up with Amazon for this video game anthology series called Secret Level. And there was a whole episode that was going to adapt Concord. And interestingly enough, that episode, all around the Concord universe, did not get canceled. The episode scheduled to release December 17th, 2024, which at the time of recording that is today. So I haven't actually gotten to watch it yet. I didn't know that would be on my watch list, but I guess I should probably go check it out, which I think is interesting. So Concord lives on for this brief moment in time as a game that no longer exists, but has an episode dedicated to it in Secret Level. Crazy. Nonetheless, there is still another game that has an even more wild story, which is The Culling 2. And this was just a weird event where there's, just a lot going on, because The Culling 1 was like kind of an early break into the battle royale genre, and The Culling 2 tried to do some really weird stuff.
I don't know. When it comes to The Culling overall, it's almost kind of a meme at this point. A lot of people already know the story, but The Culling was essentially one of the first big games to kind of break into the whole battle royale market. I mean, kind of. It was just there at the very beginning of like the massive spike in popularity. So of course, it was a little bit successful because of it. And it was like a first-person game. There was some cool mechanics to it, I guess. I mean, the game was kind of drawn out a little, but nonetheless, it had its audience base. But because of the huge rise in popularity from the genre overall, the development team, xDefiant, was like, hey, let's do a sequel, which probably wasn't the best play, because while all these other battle royale games were doing this whole free-to-play live service model, they kind of were shutting their own doors to develop a sequel instead of, doing regular updates. And The Culling 2 is one of the most memey games of all time. I mean, sure, already they were losing the race against PUBG, but I don't know if The Culling 2 was the right call. There was some interesting design choices that they did. They decided to skip the early access thing, and the player base wasn't very good. The first day of the new game launching, they had like 250 players, and within 40 hours, they were down to one last player standing. He didn't only win the Battle Royale, he won the survival of the entire game's player base. So the game ended up not being successful, and they ended up shutting the service down just 8 days later. Wow. Then in 2019, they tried to reboot things. It wasn't going well. The whole Culling series was pretty much delisted and made unavailable later on, and what a wild ride that was. They did try to bring things back with a rebranded version of The Culling again, and that one introduced a pay-per-match model, which, what a terrible idea that was, and it wouldn't be long before the servers on that would be shut down as well. So what a meme of a game. Not too interesting, but yeah, something we can't make this video without at least mentioning.
Marvel's Avengers was another big budget game that ended up completely failing. Reportedly, this game had a budget of over 170 million US dollars, which might have grown to even more because they had to delay the game for a couple months, so obviously they had to pay more salaries and more development cost. And I don't know, people just didn't really care for the game. I thought it was kind of weird that the Avengers are different actors when the Avengers were still popping off and YouTube popular. I mean, we played it. I think we can actually still play it even though they shut it down now. If you owned it, you're able to still play it, I think. But it was just kind of repetitive and the gameplay didn't feel that cool. I don't know. It was just kind of a weird game, underwhelming overall across the board. And I think think a lot of people felt like that because the game only sold like 60% of what they expected with around 3 million copies, which for an Avengers game, one of the most popular, franchises in history, is not that good of a number. There's many reports that you can find that state that they lost $200 million on both Marvel games that released around that time, which was the Guardians of the Galaxy game and then the Marvel Avengers game. So, there you could have lost, 100 million here, 100 million there, or maybe one of the games lost more than the other, but together they lost 200 million. So in an attempt to kind of recoup some of the money somehow, they would end up selling Square Enix Montreal, which is the studio that made the Guardians of the Galaxy game. They would end up selling it for 300 million, which is probably more than they lost on these two games, but they would actually announce around the same time that they're going to be investing into NFTs and like the blockchain and stuff. So if they actually ended up doing that, they probably lost all the money there again. Another big budget superhero game that failed recently was Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. This game had a lot going for it. There was a massive budget, the IP was iconic obviously, it was going to be developed by Rocksteady, who made the Arkham games, which are really beloved games. But it quickly became clear that there was just a lot of mismanagement and the development was going to take way longer than anyone expected, with the game starting development in 2016 and the costs quickly ballooning over $200 million, including like marketing budget. Initially the game was going to be like a story-driven, darker themed story, and then at some point they pivoted to this live service model, I guess in an attempt to make more money because the game took so long. I don't know. Obviously it didn't work. Everybody hated it at launch. It was really, really boring. Very generic. Nothing kind of cool about it or unique. Gameplay just felt like the standard thing you could get anywhere. Reportedly, this game sold a lot less copies than Warner Brothers had hoped for, and they were nowhere near recouping the cost of development, and it seems like they were down like 100 million at least into the hole. And in an earnings call, Warner Brothers actually revealed that the gaming division had lost over $200 million, which largely was attributed to Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Dead Space 2 marks an interesting shift for the Dead Space franchise overall. The original Dead Space, I think, performed better than people expected it, because it kind of was an interesting concept. It's like this immersive horror experience where you're lost in space on this ship and you're kind of on your own in a massive spaceship. The atmosphere, the tension, the pacing, it was just all perfect, and playing as Isaac Clarke for the first time felt truly scary. Now, the first game released in 2008 and the second game was announced for 2011, with a demo releasing at the end of 2010. And during the time leading up to launch, you could really tell EA was trying to make Dead Space a big franchise. They had the whole Your Mom Hates Dead Space campaign, which was kind of viral back in the day.
First impressions?
Oh, yeah, I'll show you my opinion. It's gross.
A little bit scary. Oh my God!
I thought it was horrible. It's very violent, too graphic, too bloody. It's very scary.
It's not a game. It's a dangerous, mind-numbing, mind-altering, demonic weapon.
That's pretty gooey, but even though it's a video game, it's not reality.
It's actually based on a true story, some astronaut or something. That's what they told me.
A true story? A monster like that? That looked like that's something from outer space.
They also released an anime after the first Dead Space came out, and there was an on-rail spin-off shooter on the Wii called Dead Space Extraction as well in 2009. Plus, 2010 also saw that awful puzzle spin-off called Dead Space Ignition, which, who was this made for, by the way? Nonetheless, I've talked about this in videos before, like, these were awful spin-offs. But EA seemed to have a lot of faith in Dead Space, since the first one sold decently well with 1 million copies. So I guess they thought with more marketing they could push sales even harder and it would pay off. When Dead Space 2 finally released, it was actually kind of a solid game, I gotta say. I mean, it was a different atmosphere, you weren't on a spaceship anymore, but it was still really atmospheric and creepy and eerie. And I gotta say, even the new setting kind of worked, even though I thought it was a little weaker than the previous title. It was definitely way better than what we would get with Dead Space 3 later on. But we're focusing on Dead Space 2 here, and with the increased marketing costs and increased development costs since they tried to make this a bigger, better sequel. The development cost went through the roof, and reports said that this game cost about $120 million to develop. If we, calculate inflation into it, it's like 170 million nowadays. So this was quite a big production. Another thing that added a lot of cost to development is the development of a multiplayer, which, I don't know, was kind of this thing back in the day where every single player game needed a multiplayer randomly, and then it would just not be popular, and games would just kind of stop doing it after a while. But it was just a weird time. I don't know, like there's a bunch of examples I can think of, like Last of Us randomly had a multiplayer that we would never see again. Mass Effect had a multiplayer that we would never see again. And I'm not saying all these multiplayer games were bad, they just weren't popular enough to keep players engaged, and usually after a couple weeks or months, the multiplayer modes were completely dead on these single player games. Nonetheless, Dead Space 2 would end up selling over 4 million copies across all platforms, which was a step up from the first game. But this didn't really cover EA's expectations since they were so sky high with the big marketing budget they had put into this, and they needed the game to sell more than 5 million copies just to break even. So it looked like this was gonna be a financial failure. And I think it's because EA tried to go too mainstream with this franchise. I mean, it was just this niche horror experience that was fine as it is. There was no need to get it to appeal to a broader audience because, if they were interested in horror games, they would just play Dead Space 1. And we would see them push even further into that when they did a bunch of changes to Dead Space 3, trying to lean into even more mainstream appeal with co-op and microtransactions, which just isolated the fanbase even further. And after Dead Space 2 already didn't make much money or any money, Dead Space 3 wouldn't do so well either. And it seemed like EA kind of didn't have any more interest in Dead Space at all after Dead Space 3. Now, I do wonder if they recouped some losses with the Dead Space remake, which was a good game, and it was just the first game remastered or remade, and that game apparently sold over 2 million copies. So, I mean, maybe they recouped some money. I don't know. Probably overall the Dead Space franchise is still in the hole. So, we haven't talked too much about Battle Royale games in this video yet, and there's a couple. They were kind of big projects, right, that were massive failures and lost a lot of money. And we talked about Ubisoft quite a bit, right? You did an xDefiant section earlier. You already looked into their struggles and stuff. But there's actually 2 BRs I want to bring up that probably lost Ubisoft a lot of money. And the first one is Hyperscape. You remember that?
I remember it for like a week. I think it's interesting how there were so many games trying to do a quick cash grab on battle royales, and then that ended up resulting in their own cash disappearing.
I mean, gotta lose some money to lose more money, I guess. But that's the Ubisoft principle. But I just find it insane that they made this. You remember how big the marketing budget was for this game? Every streamer under the sun was sponsored by them to stream this game. And I think it was part of the whole reveal process because they announced the game, and then a day later, all the partner streamers were able to play the game, and that was kind of the reveal, right? So they must have spent a lot on marketing besides development. And I looked into it a little more, and I couldn't really find when they started development. But the game only lasted 20 months after the release, which is not a lot to recoup the losses they probably had.
Longer than Concord, but yeah, I mean, whenever any game that's multiplayer and then it just shuts down fully, it wasn't in a good spot. Because some games they'll just keep the servers on or keep the lights on for a while and just let it fizzle out. But
right, yeah.
If they're straight up pulling the plug, yeah.
And I mean, this was made in Montreal, right? Ubisoft Montreal. So the developers there are getting paid a really good salary. And, this game probably took 2 or 3 years to develop. You're right. They probably shut it down because the cost of upkeep was too much. But that wasn't the only BR project they canceled around that time. Do you also remember when they announced Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon BR as well?
I think I remember. Did we talk about Ghost Recon having a project canceled in a video a while back? Right. But I don't remember, they canceled so many things in the last 2 years, it's hard to keep track of it.
They did, but it was called Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Frontline. It was another BR that was, they were trying to get into the market really aggressively, as you said earlier. And this game made it into closed beta and, was coming along in development. So they did spend a couple years on this game as well, but then ended up canceling it. So they must have lost a lot of money on this as well. Right off the bat, The
game obviously couldn't have performed well if it never released, so that's on them.
People online speculate it is because it had a very negative reaction from the community. Right. People were the people that like Ghost Recon, they like the stealth and the open world stuff. They don't want the BR that's competitive.
Right.
And it did look very generic, so I mean, I can understand that. But both these games had like years of development, years of salary, and they must have lost like tens and millions of dollars on, these projects.
And that's why Ubisoft's probably in the position that they're in now. Isn't there currently like rumors circulating around that there's a chance that there's a buyout coming up with them?
Yeah, there's rumors that Tencent is gonna take them over. I think Tencent might already own like a percentage of Ubisoft, and there's like rumors that they might try to go for majority ownership or something like that. Which that's crazy. And I mean, I don't know, Ubisoft, they just have such an insane structure with their studios. They have like 50 studios across the world, different deals with different governments. It's just insane, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And Skull and Bones exist, so it makes sense.
That game made it somehow, but hey.
It made it to the launch point. I mean, I don't know if it made it. I don't know. Define made it.
Nowadays, releasing is a big step for a lot of publishers. And
especially a Ubisoft game.
Yeah, especially Ubisoft.
I think there was a joke, like we talked on a video a while back, but it was like 4 games getting canceled in 4 months or something, and now it's like there's even more now.
Yeah, they didn't stop. They just kept going. I did look into Apex Legends Mobile because they did shut it down too, and Apex is a big game on computer and console, and I was wondering how much money they spent, how much money they made. The game launched in May 2022 and shut down in May 2023. So we got like a year out of it, and they actually posted the revenue in an earnings call, and from that you can kind of do the math, and in that year they made 40 to 45 million US dollars in revenue on Apex Legends Mobile, which that sounds like a lot on paper, but
how much do they spend on it?
Yeah, giving the salaries, the development, it's really hard to say. But this was also developed in partnership with Tencent, so I don't know, maybe if the Chinese developers have less of a salary, which they probably do, right?
Right. Overall per employee, yeah.
They could have maybe broken even on this, but I don't know. They wouldn't have shut it down if they broke even, I think. They must have lost money on it.
I wonder if they saw like the bleed out rate towards the end must have been so high that they're like, let's just pull the plug and cut our losses before they go too negative, they start losing too much money?
Yeah. Actually, I have some stats on that. And in the first 2 months, right, May and June of 2022, the game made $7 million each. And then by October, it was only half that. And then by the last month, it was only $160,000.
That's probably the most concerning. I mean, like, it's one thing, a game has a big launch. It does well. A couple months later, it cuts in half. But but when it starts dropping, any mobile game really, like that's, a AAA mobile game. If it's dropping below $1 million, it's like in the red.
For sure.
For a lot of games, at least. Because like I used to really closely follow like the gacha games numbers. And you can see it's like as soon as the game starts dropping under the like 1 million mark in a lot of cases, if it's a game that's like set up, propped up to be making millions and millions, like something trying to compete with like, mainstream status, they start to try to like pull out some crazy stuff to save it.
Or they decide to shut it down, like with Apex Legends Mobile,
Yeah.
Maybe they should have pivoted like the one game, the anime game where you shoot, where they went full, full.
What's that game called again? Winter Break.
Snowbreak. I saw a screenshot of that, and there's some crazy skins they're selling.
Dude, it started out as this like militaristic anime shooter, and it just slowly transformed into whatever.
I mean, I liked it.
I know you like it.
I still play it sometimes.
I know.
Rumbleverse was another BR that was a failure, and it was programmed by Iron Galaxy and published by Epic Games. So now, obviously, we've talked in past videos why it failed. We played it ourselves. It was kind of boring, kind of bad.
Yeah, I never realized it had like a AAA publisher with it. I thought it was like some indie game.
Nah, it wasn't. That's the thing.
Oh no.
And actually, I have some stats on development because I did actually do some math with this, and I found some numbers for this game. But I mean, obviously, it looked just like Fortnite, and it tried to compete with Fortnite. I don't know, really, really bizarre concept. I feel like if a game like this would release today, published by Epic Games, they would just incorporate it into Fortnite. It wouldn't release as a standalone.
Sorry, I got sidetracked. But yeah, no, never mind.
We should get sidetracked on.
I started thinking about what you said about Fortnite. I was like, oh, dude, the Fortnite multiplayer mode coming out.
Oh, yeah, the Counter-Strike knockoff.
I was like, dude, that's going to be kind of fun, though.
That'll be interesting. Did you see they announced they'll have normal and ranked matches from launch?
Oh, wait, really?
Yeah, it'll have a ranked mode.
Oh, dude, we're going to play that.
Yeah. It looks good. It looks promising.
Time to re-download Fortnite.
Anyways, I have some stats on this game, right? So Iron Galaxy, it looks like they made some ports between developing their previous game in 2018 and Rumbleverse releasing in 2022, but they didn't really release a major game. They just focused on ports and Rumbleverse, obviously. So Rumbleverse was their main focus, and Rumbleverse seemed to have taken 4 years to make. And they're based in Chicago, and I googled the average salary is $118,000. So that's $30 million a year in salary, and over the 4 years, $120 million, which is a lot. And I don't know, the game only had 500 players after 3 months after launch.
Wait, how many employees did they have at their studio?
250.
250 worked on Rumbleverse?
I mean, at the studio, it's hard to say where they work. Some of them probably worked on the ports, but majority must have worked on Rumbleverse.
That's wild. I didn't realize it was like a AAA size team.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was. So like the salary must be over 100 million for this game alone.
Did you use game development salary or just average Chicago salary?
Game development salary.
Wow. A lot higher than Washington State.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I looked up Washington State. It was like 100,000.
Oh, I mean, yeah.
But Chicago.
Right. I mean, Chicago, I don't know. But sorry.
I don't know what they're doing over there.
I couldn't find the player numbers. And what I meant to say earlier is the Twitch numbers fell to just 500 viewers 3 months after. And that's kind of the only thing we can gauge, right? And I was like, the highest peak on Twitch was 90,000 viewers, right? Probably some big streamers played it. So I did some math with it. So even if those 90,000 people each spent $20, that's only like almost $2 million. So I guess no shot they made any of their money back. And they didn't lose tens and tens of millions of dollars. So,
dude, it makes me miss Knockout City, which was one we didn't have picked out for this video, but Knockout City obviously must have been losing some amount of money for them to get shut down. But that was such a good game. Like that game I still mourn to this day, because we would hop on and play it. Like, we didn't play it every day, but we'd hop on and play it occasionally, at least every season.
It was fun. Yeah, I don't know.
Or like if we're hanging out with a friend or something, we're like, hey, do you want to play something different? We would jump on that. I missed that game though. It's a shame.
It is. It was. I don't know. I just like the concept of like it was like a quick time game almost. You have to like press the buttons at the right time and dodge stuff. I don't know.
There was a couple of things maybe they could have done differently. Like like small adjustments that could have been done in a season. Like to make it where maybe there was like a better on-screen indicator or something when you're supposed to press the button to catch the ball. Because it always felt like there was a little disconnect where like the net code or something, because it was online, made it where like catching the ball sometimes felt off. But if they would have just like built a system where you have to press the button a little earlier or something, according to that, the rest of the game was solid. It was just like,
yeah, it was fun. Yeah, the maps were varied too. Like there was different maps. I don't know. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Man,
they also didn't launch as free to play, right?
Yeah,
that's also
that probably didn't help.
That's also another thing I probably failed.
Yeah.
Which makes me think sometimes when like a game launch that you're like, obviously this game should have been free to play, right? And they decide to make it paid. It makes me think that development must have cost a lot, because they're so desperate to recoup the losses already that they have to launch this obvious free to play project, or what should be a free to play project, as like a paid version.
Right, like we had with Concord.
Yeah, like we had with Concord. Oh, God.
Now, a lot of you probably already know about E.T. It's just crazy in game culture significance on its own, because this was during a time where they were so confident E.T. would be like this successful game that they made way too many copies of the game. And then there was like, this all led into the video game crash of the 80s. Allegedly, a bunch of games getting buried in the desert or something. A wild lore and story. But E.T. has to at least be mentioned in this video, because there's no way that game wasn't like one of the biggest early examples of a game that just lost way too much money. I don't know. I always thought that E.T., having a game releasing years after the movie came out, and like whatever they thought or however they thought the game would be like super successful is wild, especially during a time where like Atari games were kind of just like pumping out stuff and the quality of games was like dipping. And E.T. was like a perfect culmination of all that, because the game wasn't that good either.
Yeah, and I always felt like E.T., it was a good movie as a kid, right? But like it wasn't like a big franchise. I never been like, oh, I need to play an E.T. game. It's just like, at the end of the day, it was a licensed game. Why did they make so many? Why Why did they have so much faith in this? I don't know. So many questions, dude. And then I guess it's legendary status though within the gaming history for sure.
And then of course there's like a few other games that like we probably should mention that are like notable. Obviously Saints Row. The whole reboot was just weird.
I actually have some numbers on that. You want to know?
Oh, do you? I didn't know you pulled it up. Cool. Yeah, pull it up.
Yeah, I have some numbers. So the budget was over $100 million for the game, and they sold 1.7 million units in their first week. By week 2, the sales dropped to 50% of what they had sold in the first week already.
Like we're talking like not even cracking 5 million or 3 million, 4 million.
Oh no, nowhere. I'm pretty sure the game like maybe 2.5 at the end. And it was so bad that they lowered the price. Did you know that? It launched as a $70 game, and then they reduced the base price to $30.
Yeah, I remember going on sale really early.
No, not on sale. They lowered it permanently.
They just lowered the permanent.
They lowered it permanently to $30,
Okay.
which that is crazy. Not even $40, $30, you know what I mean? They were so desperate to make some sales. So if we run those sales numbers we have, right, and we take the original price, the game probably only made like 40, 50 million in sales. And I don't think this game had microtransactions, right? So there's no way they could recoup the over $100 million budget.
I think they had a battle pass or something for DLC content. They did some stuff, but it was like not a lot of people bought it, I don't think.
And I mean, it is really crazy because this is also coupled with the previous game, Agents of Mayhem, which also sold 5 times less than the Saints Row reboot.
I didn't realize Agents of Mayhem was that. I knew Agents of Mayhem didn't do well, but I didn't realize it was that bad. Wow.
It was really bad. It was really bad. So they lost money on Agents of Mayhem, they lost money on Saints Row, and then, I mean, obviously they shut down because, yeah, I mean, 2 big projects. And I mean, they probably haven't had a moneymaker since 2013. When did Saints Row 4 come out? 2013, yeah?
Yeah, 2013 sounds right. That's so interesting. Saints Row's reboot, I think, if anything, is just like a testament to, I don't like to use the word testament. It's just an example, I guess. Like bad writing just cannibalizing itself, because the map itself, I mean, we jumped on, we played it for that Saints Row video we did, and the map itself was cool. I mean, it was fine. It wasn't offensively bad or anything. And like, the mechanics were all right. It was mostly a Saints Row game, but like, I don't know. I mean, the writing was just so awful, and then like the story was just really repetitive, or like not the story, but like the things you did in the single player experience, mission wise, the like things that you would actually do always ended the same way. You would just go somewhere, shoot stuff, drive around, shoot stuff over and over again. And the soundtrack wasn't that great either.
Yeah, it is true. And I mean, when you mentioned the mechanics, I was like, remember the things dogs pee on, what is it called again?
Fire hydrants?
Fire hydrants.
And
You
it would
drove
like
over the
lift
fire
you in the
and it,
air
like,
every
it,
time.
like flipped you on, and you were like trying to get out of there. We landed on this balcony and couldn't get out. It was just kind of
forgot about that.
But then on the other hand, the flying mechanic, where you,
I was about to say, like, remember the little flying thing where you're on top of the car and you flew off? That was cool.
That was kind of cool, yeah.
But like, I don't know, when the group gets together to talk about how they need to rob a bank so they can pay off their student loans, you're like, who wrote this?
I mean, the whole game felt like it was written by like 45-year-olds trying to target 17-year-olds, and I just think that's kind of weird.
It just didn't work. Now, on the flip side of things, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about Rainbow Six Extraction.
Right. I mean, that's another game we played, and we were kind of excited for, because we are big fans of the Outbreak mode. We played that quite a bit, I think.
Oh yeah, back during the special timed event, we did like that. I think there's a lot of reasons why this game failed. I think the biggest thing, I mean, already it's weird to try to, I don't know. The whole game's premise was weird, but I think the biggest thing that hurt the game was this whole like cycling system where you couldn't just use the character that you're trying to level up whenever you wanted. Like there was like a cooldown for every character. And I think that turned a lot of people off from the game right away. I do think that there was some interesting like deep mechanics to the game, but I think it just like was very annoying in that regard. And it like made it where progression felt so slow that you just I don't know, you just got over it. Like, you're just like, what's the point of doing this stuff anymore? Why should I challenge myself when I can't even do the thing I want to do? And I think that definitely contributed to that game falling off hard, and then ultimately got abandoned after, like, as soon as it hit the 1 year mark. Ubisoft was like, okay, yeah, we're done.
I just think extraction shooters are really hard to do. Tarkov is the only one that kind of worked out for a while, right?
Would you count this as an extraction shooter, though?
That's what they promoted it.
Really?
It's called the Rainbow Six Extraction, right?
Yeah, I just thought I used the word extraction because I like the word,
that's what I'm
not
saying.
because
That's
it's
why
an
you
extraction
can.
shooter.
That's why you have to wait. You have to literally go back and extract the character if you want to play it again.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
And that's a dumb thing. They made the extraction mechanic based on the characters, and that's like not like on items you bring.
And there's no like looting or anything.
It obviously is just a shooter, and then they forced this extraction mechanic because they like saw that extraction mechanics are popular or something. I have some more details on the development.
Okay, yeah.
This game started development in 2014, 2015, roughly. And it was supposed to be like a sci-fi game initially. Like,
Right.
it wasn't even Siege themed. But after Outbreak was popular in 2018, they were like, oh, let's pivot this game to make a, Siege tie-in game similar to Outbreak. So, like, that brings it to like a 7 to 8 year development cycle.
I didn't know about the early stuff. That's interesting.
They had it built on a different engine, is what it sounded like, and then pivoted to the Siege engine in 2019. And on player sets, we have like Ubisoft saying that after the first week, there's 3 million players. I do remember this game launched on Game Pass, so I think a lot of these players probably didn't pay for the game.
Yeah, and then the game would be heavily put on sale for a long time, so...
Right, that as well. So, like, yeah. But even if 3 million people bought the game at $40, I don't know, they put so much time into this game. There's just no way it made any money. Especially if it was developed in Canada again, where, like, the salaries are high.
When it comes to Nintendo, it's very interesting because so many times we see Nintendo just, like, make stupid amounts of money, right? Mario Kart sales, Animal Crossing New Horizons sales. It's all good.
Switch sales.
What? Oh, for the Switch.
No, I meant the Switch sale. The console itself sold a ton.
Oh, and yeah.
No.
Oh, I thought you said Witch sales.
No, Switch sales. Switch sales.
I was like, what do you mean Witch? Yeah. So Star Fox, though, is interesting. As a kid, Star Fox 64 was one of my first video games ever for the Nintendo 64. I really liked the game. Back in the day, that game sold very well. Sold like 4 million units, which in the 90s was like a very good number of games sold back then.
That's a crazy amount.
And it's interesting how this series just never did a true sequel to that game. They always would just like try to do some weird stuff. And they literally... they kind of just like ruined their own franchise, I think, and just made people so uninterested in Star Fox over the years. Star Fox Adventure was just like a completely different game that like they threw the Star Fox IP on midway through development, or even further than midway through development. And they're like, this is going to be a Star Fox game now. And we all know about the whole like dinosaur plant stuff we've talked about before in video. But like, I mean, the game is a fine like adventure game, but it's not a Star Fox game like Star Fox 64 was. And that game sold okay, probably because of some brand recognition. But after that, I feel like the damage was done with the Star Fox IP, because the next Star Fox game didn't even crack 1 million sales. And that was like a big budget GameCube game. And then they did Star Fox Command, which was a DS game. And that game was like closer to whatever they'd done before, but it was also like really different from Star Fox 64. And that game sold really badly. Then there was like a hiatus. Then they did Star Fox 64 for the 3DS. It was like a remake. And that game broke 1 million again for the first time, even though it came out like 15 years after Star Fox 64, which brought us to the Wii U era when the Wii U was already struggling and Nintendo was like not putting out games for whatever reason. They were like, Star Fox Zero is going to be our big game. And that game flopped really hard. I think part of it was it's just like another reboot of a game that's already been rebooted essentially like 2 or 3 times, but then they didn't want to call it a reboot. And that was that whole thing. And then there was this gimmick of where you have to look at the Wii U gamepad and then look at the other screen. And it just felt more gimmicky than it felt polished. And if anything, it felt like if they were going to do the whole thing with the 2 screens, they should have done that day one with the game. With day one with the Wii U launch and make it a launch title or something so that people can like get used to the thing. But this was late in the Wii U's life where people were over the whole gamepad thing. People didn't like the gamepad.
The gamepad was so stupid. I don't know. It's just, it was just like useless almost, like I don't know.
They could have done cool stuff with the gamepad. I just felt like in most cases they didn't. There's a couple of games I'm sure that used it well, but it was dumb. And Star Fox Zero obviously did not do well because if you look at the Nintendo Switch lineup, so many Wii U games were re-released on the Switch because Nintendo likes money and not a lot of people had a Wii U. So they're like, this is opportunity to get more people playing. They didn't do that with Star Fox Zero. And they obviously had a big budget for Star Fox Zero, or at least a decent sized budget. And they did a big marketing campaign. They made a whole anime episode special thing. That was interesting. But at the end of the day, the game sold almost as bad as Star Fox Command, which was a DS game
from 2006. You can just imagine for like a big budget thing, that's not really a good look. And Star Fox Zero, never sold well. They like tried to like package it with another game even that wasn't even a full game. It was like a prototype game that they had shown off before. They're like, it's Star Fox now. And they like packaged that together to try to get people interested.
Oh, I do remember that vaguely, yeah.
It was like Star Fox Guard or something.
Yeah. I thought that was like like Pokemon Home. I never really like looked into it, but I thought it was just like some, goofy stuff.
Not Pokemon Home. It was just like a security camera game where you get to watch the security cameras.
Like FNAF?
FNAF in like a tower defense game.
Oh, okay. That's just it was weird. I always thought it was like some like you draw or something, like some like software for like little kids or something. Like I never really.
Come over sometime. I'll dust off the Wii U. We can play Star Fox Guard for the rest of the day.
Oh no. Also, I have a question. Was that a remake for 3DS? Was that good?
Yeah, it was just a remake of Star Fox 64. They got the old voice actors to come back and re-record their lines. That was kind of cool. Or most of them, not all of them, but most of them, and it was competent. It was fine, but like they'd already remade Star Fox so Star Fox 64, the first one I played, was a remake of Star Fox for the Super Nintendo, right? And then they kept some story across those games. Star Fox Adventure took place like 6 or 7 years later. Star Fox Assault took place a year after that. Star Fox Command took place another year after that, and its story was insane. The gameplay was actually kind of cool. It was all like just all range mode gameplay, but it was cool. There's like branching things, and I thought it was actually a really fun game. Didn't sell well in Japan, and the story was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, there's these branching storylines, and they did not care with the story. They're like, we're gonna just come up with some random stuff.
Is that the one where like at the end you can get the ending where he has a kid or something?
Yeah, the Marcus and the Cloud ending, that's one of them. There's one called Star Falco, where Falco goes and makes his own team. There's one where like Fox and Crystal break up and like Fox is crying and it's like a really terrible looking illustration. It just doesn't look right. I think Fox becomes an alcoholic in one of them, and then they become like F-Zero racers.
Oh, I do remember the F-Zero one.
I'm pretty sure that's one. It's wild. That story alone, because there's like 10 different endings and none of them were good. I think put Star Fox in a weird place where they're like, oh, how do we continue the story? But also the sales were really bad. So I don't know if anybody at Nintendo was like, let's continue Star Fox. Until Star Fox Zero.
Which was another reboot, right?
Which was another reboot. And mind you, there was also the Star Fox 3DS game, which was a remake of the N64 game that was a reboot. So it's just like constantly rehashing this first game over and over again.
So where does Star Fox 2 fit in? Because that didn't release, right? But now it's released?
Right, that game was a sequel to the Super Nintendo game.
So it would have been before the first reboot.
Before the first reboot. And then they took elements from that game and they put it into Star Fox 64, like Star Wolf was introduced in. Then a lot of the elements also would show up again in Star Fox Command and Star Fox Zero. But that wasn't it, because Star Fox had one more failure connected to it.
Another one?
Another failure connected to it. So after Nintendo was like, yeah, whatever, Star Fox didn't do well. They did this whole marketing budget with Star Fox before to like at least have people aware that this character exists. And it's a Super Smash Bros. Character, so like people know about Fox McCloud. But they did a partnership with Ubisoft. So Ubisoft back in the mix for this game called Starlink Battle for Atlas. This was wild. So this was like a toy tie-in for the Switch, Xbox, and PlayStation, but Nintendo would have exclusive content if you played on the Switch version that would be connected to the Star Fox universe. There were these big budget like CGI cutscenes with Fox characters. You could interact with the characters and fly the R-Wing and stuff. And that game failed. It's a Ubisoft game.
It is another Ubisoft game. Wow, dude. Look how the timelines collide, dude.
Right. So this is interesting. It was this whole toy concept where you would get toys and you would construct your ship with the toy or something, and then they'd be in your game. And this was right at the time where all of the games like Disney Infinity and Lego Dimensions, all of these games that did the whole like toys to game tie-in stuff were dying off. They were shutting them down because they weren't making money anymore. And Ubisoft's like, let's make one. And I don't know, like it was a fad when that type of stuff started, right? Like the whole Skylanders thing, right? And it ran its course and people weren't interested anymore. And then Ubisoft's like, now's our chance. Let's get in there with Starlink Battle for Atlas. And the game sold very poorly. There was a series of toys that were supposed to release that got canceled altogether after the release of the game. Yeah, Star Fox had its own little DLC arc for the Switch version of the game that was the last time we've seen the Star Fox characters. Besides like Smash Bros. Ultimate, which I don't know if that was right before or right after, but
yeah, but I mean, also that doesn't really count, right? It's like
so I don't know, just wild that everything comes back to Ubisoft at the end of the day. Similarly, Ubisoft had another partnership with Nintendo, a very rare partnership because Nintendo, with some of their main IPs, don't just like license them out. But Ubisoft and Nintendo had reached a deal to do a Mario and Rabbids crossover, and when the Switch first came out, there was a Mario and Rabbids game. I think it was Kingdom Battle or something like that. This was during a time where there weren't as many first-party Nintendo games out. Just a handful of like Mario titles. I think Mario Odyssey was there, and maybe that was it for like a main Mario game. And that game actually sold decently. However, years later, Ubisoft gets the chance to do a sequel, and they do Mario and Rabbids Sparks of Hope. And despite the fact that the game still sold okay, Ubisoft had well over-predicted or over-expected the game's performance, probably thinking that the game would sell as much as the first one did. And I don't know, with sequels, I don't feel like that's the case. Maybe they're riding too heavily on like hype for the Mario movie or something. But Ubisoft ended up citing that Sparks of Hope was one of the reasons why they didn't make as much money that year. And or didn't make the sales expectations that they had for that game. And I just feel like it's interesting that they had these wild expectations for a sequel game to Mario and Rabbids. The game themselves are okay from what I can tell.
Yeah, people like them. People seem to really enjoy them, yeah.
But I don't know. I just think Ubisoft set the bar way too high for what they expected to happen. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, the moral of the story is Ubisoft sucks. Thanks to our Patrons for making this video possible.
And our YouTube members.
Subscribe if you're new. And yeah, I think I hope Ubisoft does some cool stuff in the future. Don't get me wrong. But just the past couple of years have been rough for Ubisoft's leadership decisions.
Yeah, they messed up Siege 2, but that's for a different video.
Oh. Yeah. Games that got worse after a while. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you guys soon with some new stuff.